Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Daily Kos The Brief. It's our weekly show about politics. I'm Marcos Melissas. I'm here with Carrie Eleveld. And today, Carrie, what are we going to be talking about today?
Well, we are going to be doing our annual check-in about the GOP. That's right, the Republican Party. And we have our favorite, most informed guest about the Republican Party. Tim Miller of the Bulwark would also be a close second. Okay. Close second. Okay, I do like him, but Sarah Longwell, my old buddy from DC, is our favorite. GOP crystal ball prognosticator for sure. Once a year we do this. It's all we can take at Daily Kos.
I was just gonna say, you guys only talk about Republicans like once a year. One time.
About them all year. We only check in with someone from the Republican Party once a year.
Sarah, are you still a registered Republican?
You know, that's a great question. I think I probably am in DC registered. And I'm pretty sure it's because I wanted to make sure that when I voted for Joe Biden, I got counted as a Republican voting for Joe Biden.
I like that.
But a lot of times in DC, you'd register as a Democrat, not for any allegiance to a political party, but so you can have any say in local politics whatsoever.
Right.
Yep, makes sense.
Right.
Makes sense.
But spiritually, I would call myself, I'm sort of a renegade independent at this point.
Renegade independent. Okay, you have it there. So if you haven't guessed it by now, Sarah Longwell is our guest. She is my old buddy from DC. She's pro-democracy, anti-Trump, publisher of the Bulwark, host of the great podcast, The Focus Group, which if you haven't checked it out,
guys,
get to it. It's different from polling because you actually get to hear voters in their own words say what they think about the issues. So a lot of times polls can tell us sort of what they think, but not why they think it. So the focus groups are really interesting. I find them incredibly helpful in how I shape my coverage. Sarah actually has her hands in a lot of her paws in a lot of different pies. But those are the main ones that for the purposes of today. And we are so glad to have her back to check in on the patient known as the GOP. And Sarah, from a pro-democracy standpoint, how is the patient doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty bleak for a while. I will say, 2022 was great. I'm on a high from 2022 that has not let up because we defeated some of the worst anti-democracy Republicans in the swing states. If you try to imagine an alternate universe in which Kari Lake is the governor of Arizona and, Doug Mastriano is the governor of Pennsylvania, like we're just in a totally different.
I do not want to imagine that world, Sarah.
Yeah. And so I think that was just a really good brushback pitch against this Republican Party. And so I think it's been interesting to watch them stagger around and try to figure out, because they are in control of the House. And so they want to, telegraph we're in control. We're in our, big kid seat here. And then, it's a disaster from the jump. Kevin McCarthy's got his, just the burn it all down caucus coming for him. They have no interest in governing. And I was probably the most annoyed I've been since 22 is during the coverage of that, when people were talking about the Republicans as though there was a governing wing and a chaos wing. And I was like, no, there's not. There's no governing. There might be some governing people that are still there, but there's no wing. And so the way that I sort of feel like things are now, and it's so weird to think about it this way, but there's like a MAGA establishment that's kind of an unholy alliance between Kevin McCarthy, Donald Trump, and Marjorie Taylor Greene that is formed. That's just sort of about a particular kind of power, but it is like sort of institutional power that they want to wield. But then there's like the chaos MAGA wing, which is more like they've internalized everything that Trump showed them. Trump's not actually a part of them, but they have internalized the idea that if you are the squeaky wheel, if you say no to everything, if you try to burn it all down, that there's a constituency for that, and that you can be famous and you can go on Ban Show. And so that sort of, it's all MAGA. It's all MAGA, from top to bottom. There's no sort of pro-democracy side. And it's even weird who they call moderates. Like, there aren't that many moderates left. And so the party's in a bad place, but it's not in a particularly dominant place, which is nice.
How do you categorize at this point someone like Mitch McConnell? Like, does he have a power base anymore?
So he's a power base in Washington. I mean, he's still like the best. I don't know, is Brinksman the right word? He's still the best person, and people are going to be deferential to him. I would say Rick Scott's attempt to come at the king in that way has been it's been like much less advantageous than the Chaos Caucus that came from McCarthy. Like they hurt McCarthy. They embarrassed McCarthy. I would say Rick Scott's just kind of, McConnell's been like Teflon. And so the problem for McConnell is he has tried a couple of times to figure out how you mount pushback, but he's never quite done it effectively. His moment was right after the insurrection. He made a choice, he screwed it up, and now he's dealing with the consequences, right?
I 100% agree with you on that. I can't tell you how many times people are like, well, McConnell's, it's unfortunate. I'm like, he had a chance and he didn't find those 17 votes. He didn't put his butt on the line to like make that happen and to actually impeach Donald Trump. So anyway, go ahead, please. Yeah.
No, so actually I want to sort of use that a little bit of a question, Sarah. We didn't want to talk about the Kerry Lake alternate universe, but I am curious what you think the GOP would look like today in that alternate universe where Mitch McConnell actually follows through on his criticism of Trump and whips for impeachment. What would that have looked like today?
That's a great question. I mean, like, first of all, there's no Trump back in the primary. So there's that piece of it. And honestly, Mitch McConnell at that point could have, because just even thinking back about the timeline and how that would have impacted things, Donald Trump owned those midterms in terms of picking the primary challengers. Like one of the places Mitch McConnell caved is on like Herschel Walker. Like in the beginning, there was this whole thing in establishment DC, Republican establishment DC circles, which I still dabble in from time to time, where everyone's kind of like, Herschel's not going to make it. Like this guy's not going to be the candidate. And then, Trump just like runs roughshod because McConnell's early kind of signal was like, yeah, we're not doing this. And then of course he's like, I guess we're doing this. I think McConnell has been made to look like a fool. Like he came out after that too and said, yeah, if Trump's the nominee, I'll vote for him. He was kind of sweaty when he said it. You could tell. And so I think to the extent that the party has moved in a place that Mitch McConnell has like some institutional control over, but he's got no spiritual or intellectual control over, but that would be the big thing, right? If he had gotten rid of Trump, Trump wouldn't have made his picks in the primary. He wouldn't have dragged all those election deniers through. The election denialism probably wouldn't have taken root as deeply. And they probably would have done much better and had much better candidates in the midterms.
No, yeah. I mean, they may have had the Senate because Mehmet Oz probably wouldn't, he got his boost from Trump. A generic Republican would have done better. Obviously, in Arizona, a generic Republican would have done better than the creepy what's his
Blake
name?
Masters.
Yeah, Blake.
Unabomber guy.
Yeah. So.
Wait, I just add what people
Georgia,
are always what people always want to say too is, well, it's not McConnell's fault because Trump picked all the people. Well, it is McConnell's fault, first of all, because he didn't impeach, he didn't whip for those votes, but also he failed miserably at attracting better candidates in New Hampshire, like Governor Sununu there, and Governor Ducey in Arizona to run for Senate. And he couldn't get those because they didn't want to be part of his do nothing caucus. So, he failed also to get reasonable candidates, not even just in the places where he kind of caved to Trump.
Yeah, but this is where he gets run over, right? So he's making his pitch to Sununu, he's making his pitch to Hogan, he's making his pitch to Ducey, and they're saying, Mitch, we love you, man. We'd love to do it for you, but I'm not taking this guy yelling at me through my primary. I'm not taking this guy, calling me names, and it's not even about the do nothing Congress. Like, they didn't want to be part of Trump's Republican Party. They all wanted to wait to run for president to say, no, I'm going to be the person. I mean, they're still like egomaniac, crazy people to some degree on this. Like, yeah, I'm the one who's going to move us past Trump in this Republican Party. But that's why nobody wanted to deal with like being part of the Trump. And McConnell couldn't credibly say, hey, we got him under control. We're running him off. No, we've got the majority. He knows he doesn't. You know, he knows it would have been painful for them, and he couldn't do a lot to make it better.
Hold on, unmuting. Okay, so I do think we should move forward a little bit and talk about 2024. I do just want to ask one more question about McConnell and Kevin McCarthy running the House for the GOP and Mitch McConnell running the Senate as minority leader. How are they impacting each other as they position for 2024? Because McCarthy's only got a handful essentially of seats to insulate him from losing the House. McConnell has an amazing Senate map. And I'm just wondering how you see them interacting, playing off of each other. I mean, is McConnell trying to run as far away from Kevin McCarthy and his crazy caucus as possible?
Yeah, I mean, yes, but the biggest difference is that McConnell is going to play in primaries. McConnell is going to go this time. He is not going to make the same mistake he made last time. He's going to say, Trump is weaker. I'm in charge. We're going to go get candidates that can win. We've got a good map. They will recruit better candidates this time around. You know, McCarthy, to get that speakership, cut this ridiculous deal saying he wouldn't play in primaries because a part of what they wanted to wrest out of him was the idea that he would try to get more electable candidates by taking out some of the crazier factions. They got that from him. He won't go play. He won't take out the Madison Cawthorns. And so where McCarthy, McConnell's going to be trying to put himself in the best position to win races and try to get normal candidates in there, McCarthy doesn't have that. He just doesn't even have that card.
So, Carrie, I know you want to move on to 2024, but I have one more question about 2022. And so we know that Democrats exceeded all expectations. Republicans didn't get their wave. And a big part of that was persuasion. And we've all long had this argument about persuasion versus mobilization, right? Do we convince people that aren't Democrats to vote Democrats? Do we get non-voting Democratic leaning non-voters to actually turn out and vote, right? Turns out we did a little bit of both this time, and it actually worked out really well, right? So the argument becomes a little less clear-cut, it seems to me. You've been talking to people, you do your focus groups. What do you see in people's voting decisions that benefited the Democrats last year that, bridge forward into 2024?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let me just throw in my 2 cents on the persuasion side. We spent a lot of persuasion money. We were the biggest outside spender against Kari Lake. And I think that a big part of building those permission structures was, and it dovetails with the question you're asking, right? So that the reason that Blake Masters, I was doing all these focus groups with swing voters the whole time. And it was super interesting because the swing voters would say, I don't really like the job that Biden's doing. I'm frustrated with the state of things. I want to vote for a Republican, but I don't want to vote for Blake Masters. He is so weird. And and people would always say kind of his position on abortion, he's an election denier, and the Unabomber thing. And that's how they would talk about all these candidates. Like Doug Mastriano, they would say, well, he's a weird, crazy person. I'm not going to vote for him. And so the candidate quality or lack thereof, and the way that came together with the abortion issue, which was really people's way in to understand how somebody was too extreme, plus the election denialism, which was the other check in the box of this person is too extreme for me to vote for, painted an overall picture of candidates that even people who were Republican friendly, Republican curious, maybe even really wanted to vote for Republicans, didn't want to vote for those individual Republicans. And a lot of times that was coupled with Democratic candidates who were pretty broadly acceptable. Mark Kelly, I just had a lot of people in the focus groups kind of be like, I really love Mark Kelly, but he's okay. Or actually the most popular one, people liked Josh Shapiro, the new governor of Pennsylvania. I mean, obviously he wanted a blowout by 15 points, but he was the person that people were most positive about. Gretchen Whitmer had a big
By people, are you saying independents or Republicans?
Swing voters. Yeah, swing voters.
Okay.
People who had voted for Republicans, even voted for Trump the first time. Josh Shapiro had done a lot of local work that had people, they knew that he had prosecuted the Catholic Church for pedophilia in Pennsylvania. They knew a bunch of stuff about him. He was, he'd been AG, and they just felt connected to him. And Gretchen Whitmer was someone who, people were kind of frustrated with Gretchen Whitmer around some COVID things, and like she hadn't fixed the roads that she said she was going to fix. They also kind of broadly liked her, and they really didn't like Tudor Dixon. That her saying, this is where abortion again became sort of the defining way of thinking about somebody as too extreme. Tudor Dixon saying the 12-year-old, they were raped, would have to carry the baby to term. Like everybody remembered that. Everyone knew that. Every swing voter was like, absolutely not. She's disqualified from me voting for her. I guess I'll vote for Whitmer. And so, when Republicans are just hanging themselves with crazy candidates and the Democrats are running pretty broadly appealing candidates, even, Cortez Masto, I thought, ran a pretty good campaign. We were really involved in that race. The Democratic Secretary of State candidates were really strong against some real whack jobs. It was I did a lot of work trying to make Secretary of State races relevant because nobody really knew what those did. And in the end, there were real marginal differences. Like people where the Secretary of States ran behind other people in the party because people did think that they were too extreme. The election denialism stuff broke through. They didn't think they should be in charge of elections.
So let me just ask real quick, because you obviously put a lot of time in to looking at these Democratic candidates. Who do you think ran? I mean, in terms of, Marcos is going to hate me for this, but let's just say Biden decides not to run. Okay. Who do you think is top 1, 2, 3 in terms of potential benchers who you think, based on your information not just who you like, but who you think, based on your information doing focus groups with swing voters and persuadable voters, who do you think has the right pitch for that?
Yeah, not to overdo it on this guy, but Josh Shapiro was kind of a marvel in terms of how much Republican voters, not even swing voters, like straight up Republican voters were like, I actually really like him. Yeah, I think he's totally good. And that's why you saw a 15-point blowout. Whitmer, I've been sort of a Shapiro Whitmer 2028 stan. I think that is
flip that.
Yeah, well, either way. Yeah, Whitmer, Shapiro, Whitmer. I mean, she's obviously, look, I think Midwest governors of big swing states of these blue, I think that's really, I think that's a super strong ticket. I also think, I think Warnock has pulled out a bunch of tough ones in a tough state in an environment where Kemp won by a gajillion points. I think that's pretty impressive. I think he's got a story to tell. I think he's figured out how to sort of, work with swing voters and bring them in. So I got to say, though, it is just to your point about Biden, the Dems, I think, have a really strong 28 bench. Really strong 28 bench. Shapiro can't run right now. I don't want to get into the Biden conversation if you don't want to get into the Biden conversation, but obviously
I want to get into the Biden conversation.
Come on. Not when we've got her on to talk about the Republican Party. You and I can hash out the Democrats later.
Well, okay, but I guess I just, if he's running, he's running. But if it was going to be somebody in 24, if he wasn't running, I think Whitmer would be a strong. I don't think you can go with a first-term governor. I think you need somebody who's a second term who's proven that they can win a second time with a big margin like she did. So those were the people that came out. And I'm also I've been very excited about your Abigail Spanbergers and Alyssa Slotkins. I just think of some of these, in these tough swingy districts, these women with foreign policy experience, CIA, those are good for the moment where we are. Yeah.
So one of the issues, and maybe you could speak to it some more, but obviously was abortion and the Dobbs decision. And by all indications, the mainstream Republican Party, which, is MAGA dominated at this point, but they seem to want to double down on abortion. I mean, the lesson should have been, even Trump said we were too extreme on abortion, and obviously he got smacked down, but it does seem like they didn't learn that lesson, or they think they just didn't message it enough.
Yeah. Well, this is when you asked about the health of the Republican Party, and I was sort of saying they're casting about. This is part of the weird thing that's happening is there's people in the party who understand super bad issue for them. Let's pass compromise sort of 15-week exceptions for rape, incest, the life of mother bills as fast as we can and get this off the table. But then there's the activist base, and these are the people who, let's go down with the ship on Trump. Let's be purist. I got to tell you, the lack of pragmatism on kind of the MAGA wing of the party, like they're not taking the lessons from 22 and 20 and saying, you know what, actually people might not like what we're selling right now. And because there's what's built up in this over the last decade is just, and I would say the left used to have this problem that I didn't think the right had, because I felt like the right was more pragmatic and it wasn't doing purity tests as much. But the right is now super purity test driven, super issue driven. Primaries are gonna be really hard for Republicans, because the gap between what base voters want and what normie swing voters will tolerate is getting super big. It's just getting really big. And that's the problem. Straddling that for Republicans is getting harder and harder.
And it seems to me that they also have before it was, it was the cliche, right? You run to appeal to your party's base in the primary, and then you swing to the center for the general election. I didn't see a lot of swinging to the center. I don't know if they're even capable of that kind of mental shift where we're going to say, okay, I'm going to tamp down on some of my less popular positions. Like they seem to just double down and by sheer force of will that people will somehow vote for those unpopular positions.
Yeah, I mean, the people it depends on who you're talking about, I guess. And it depends on the particular dynamic. I agree with that. Although, I think that, I think Ron DeSantis, just since if we want to get into 24 and talk about Republicans, I do think he's got a little bit, he understands the base general dynamic. And I think it's weird because he is going hard. He's kind of trying to outrun Trump on the right, but I think he's got a pretty clear strategy of, I got to pick up more of these always Trumpers. I cannot let Trump live with a plurality of 30%. I've got to start digging into them. And so I think he's going to run hard for a while until he feels like he's cratered Trump. And then I think he'll start moving back in, because there'll be a slightly more of an open primary feel. I mean, I think Ron DeSantis runs differently if it's one kind of mano a mano with Trump versus open field with Nikki Haley and Tim Scott and Mike Pence. I think DeSantis will understand. He's not the most adept politician, but he'll understand that particular two-step. These candidates in 22, Carrie Lake didn't have a mode in which she knew how to be normal for centrist voters. The election was stolen always.
She calls herself governor now.
Right. She's running a shadow government in Arizona. She's both the governor now, but also talking about a Senate run. It's great.
The good news is that she can have the Unabomber as part of her cabinet. So this is a good opportunity, though, for us to get into a poll that you guys recently ran at the Bulwark, right? You had what's that guy's name? Whit Ayers. Sorry, Whit Ayers. I wanted to say Whitaker, but anyway, Whit Ayers, and he did a poll for you guys of Republican voters, right? This was just Republican voters, and a couple interesting points there. You said, the roughly 30% of Trumpers. One data point that was super interesting, everybody jumped on, was the idea that if Trump ran as an independent or ran as a third-party candidate, and you had DeSantis and Biden, I think it was, you tested, that Trump would take 28% of the Republican vote. That's 28% of Republicans, right? Not 28% overall, but 28% of Republicans. And so obviously, if that's really true, or if it's even a shade of true, right? It doesn't have to actually be 30%, but if it's really true, or if it's a shade of if it's 15% or something, that's the death knell for a GOP nominee. Let me just say one other thing before I ask you to reflect on that, which is, you guys did a bunch of polling about who, the Republican voters like best. In a head-to-head between Trump and DeSantis, you end up getting, let's see, what was it? Sorry, I'm looking at, it's 28% for Trump, 44% for DeSantis. Is that right? Oh no.
I think it was 30. No. I think you might be looking at the three-way ballot. There's there's a head-to-head, there's a three-way ballot, and a 10-way ballot.
You're right. I'm looking at the wrong one. The head-to-head between DeSantis and Trump is 52% for DeSantis and 30% for Trump. And then then pastorally speaking, if you look at the candidates, if you look at more candidates besides just DeSantis and Trump, generally speaking, it's DeSantis on top, Trump next, Pence next, Nikki Haley next, and then everybody else is like in the 1, 3, 2 percentile.
Yeah.
So anyway, do you think that 28% if Trump ran third party is true? And I know it's your poll. I know you're not going to say, yeah, that's true. That's a trash poll.
Oh, no. I think it's high. I think it's high. I think it's high for where you'll be ultimately when people are faced with a head-to-head decision. But let me just tell you, let me just back up for a second and tell you why we did this poll. Because obviously I'm a qual person, but I'd been doing the focus groups since 2022, and I'd been just talking to Republicans. I've been since 2022, and I had watched, I'm not sure when the last time I was on here, but one of the things that was interesting is right around January 6th, we saw a real nosedive in the number of people saying that they wanted Trump to run again in 2024. And that's when DeSantis was starting to have his boomlet. And the numbers went from like more than half of every group saying they wanted Trump to run again to sometimes nobody saying it. But, there were still people in the mix who wanted Trump to run again. But after 2022, you could not find somebody who wanted Trump to run again. And so we were doing this thing when you find a focus group, you do a screen, and we were just looking for Trump 16, Trump 2020 voters. We were like, I know there's people who still want Trump. So we screened for people who view Trump very favorably. And then we started talking to those groups, and we were like, oh, these people are partying like it's 2015. Like they are ride or die for Trump. Nobody but him. He's the best. And one of the things we would ask them in the focus groups is if Trump runs as an independent, will you vote for him anyway, even if there's another Republican in? And they were like, yes, definitely. And I was like, I need to know how big this group is. I need to know just roughly how big this group is right this minute. And so I called Witt, who's a GOP pollster, and said, hey, he had done a cool poll before that I liked where he had separated people into always Trump, maybe Trump, never Trump segments. And I was like, hey, I want to do a version of that, but I really want to get at this question of how many people would follow Trump as an independent, because I think that's a truer reflection of how dug in people are. And that 28% is people right now who are like, I'm Trump or bust, Now that number goes down. That number goes down as you get closer. That number goes down when the reality of a Democratic president is in there. Trump's been knocked out for some reason, and probably if he's lost the primary, they've gone through some process of grieving that and moving on. That being said, I don't know if Trump runs as an independent. I do know he's a very gnarly presence on whoever beat him, likely DeSantis. And for all of the should Joe Biden, shouldn't Joe Biden, the one thing he's really got going for him is that I think a head-to-head for Joe Biden with anybody under the age of 60 is really tough, really tough. But the great news is Donald Trump will be there to tell a chunk of his people what a jerk and a failure and a loser that Republican candidate is, because Donald Trump does not care about the Republican Party. He just cares about himself. He's just looking to get attention. And so I think that is good news for the Democrats, really rough news for Republicans. What if that number's 5%, 7%? Those are decisive numbers in that scenario. And so Trump is just a problem for Republicans. But the other part of it, the other sort of scary flip side is that's always what's partly given Trump leverage, because everybody knows that he's a burn it all down guy. If it's not him, they also know that he can take some of his people and walk, which makes they are freaked out about taking him on directly. So they don't.
So Sarah, Carrie and I have this theory that Ron DeSantis is kind of like a Scott Walker or a Fred Thompson or a Jeb Bush figure that is more impressive in theory. And when people read about him, because he's saying the things they want to see, anti-critical race theory, racism and xenophobia. But he's short. He's got a weird voice. He doesn't have a lot of presence when he walks into a room. And so we're wondering if he would actually survive the glare of the national spotlight. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. And if you have any focus group anecdotes that maybe speak to that.
Yeah, well, so the focus groups are pretty uniformly in his corner. But the thing about the focus groups is that they have this very shallow relationship with him right now, right? They've seen some YouTube clips of him yelling at Disney, calling them groomers, yelling at teenagers in masks, yelling at the media in his state, standing at the podium and shaking, lecturing people. And they're like, that's the kind of guy I want. But to your point, I remember this moment in the debate where he was debating Charlie Crist. Not not the most astounding opponent, Charlie Crist. But Chris kind of says to him, "Yeah, but you're going to go run for president. You're not even going to be here for governor." And Ron DeSantis just like starts smiling awkwardly, shuffling and Chris kind of presses him on it, and he just keeps smiling and staring and won't answer. And then he starts kind of being like, "Move on." And he gets, that weird grimacy smile. Anyway, I was like, "Oh, this guy's not great. He's not so good at politics. There's no charm. There's no ability to just, I mean, literally he knows he's going to get asked this question. You say, "I don't know. I'm not thinking about running for president right now. I'm just thinking about the people of Florida." Not that hard. But he doesn't do it. And he just like gets mad. And so I don't know a ton about DeSantis. I do think that the question of whether or not he's Scott Walker is a real one. That being said, he does understand what these voters want. Trump, the way that they talk about DeSantis is super clear. He's Trump without the baggage. So Trump is still the center of their world in terms of, I want a fighter, I want someone who's going to own the libs, I want a little bit of performance. And this is what Ron DeSantis gives them by saying woke, 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 yelling at people, whatever. They do like that. And so even if this is something you always have to, I try to remember. I find Donald Trump entirely repellent. Like his face it's gross. Lots of people found him charming. He was a celebrity. And so like, I have to remember that when I find Ron DeSantis off-putting, that for a lot of people, what he's saying though is resonating. And they do like the fact that he's like, seems mad and is going to like fight about it. And so I don't know how he'll perform, honestly. Like I could definitely go either way. And that's just like, we'll have to wait and see. I do know, I mean, the rap on him is he doesn't have a lot of close advisors. When Witt was on my podcast, he was his pollster against Gillum in 2018. And like, none of those people are there anymore. He's got this very tight sort of group, mostly listens to his wife. And
no allies in like other governors, like within the broader establishment.
Right. And so
he doesn't seem to, and he also doesn't seem to like the glad hand at all with donors. I mean, which is part of the process. I mean, it's part of like showing up with the donors and, letting them, have 30 minutes of your time or whatever it is, or an hour or whatever. So let me just throw something at you,
Carrie,
out of the blue.
Carrie. Yeah. So we're almost out of time. So
this is it. There's so much more. There's so much more. I have so many things.
I should keep my answers shorter.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, if Longwell hadn't droned on, I might have been able to get more of my own stuff in.
My bad.
But so, okay. I think this is a fair question to end on though, because virtually no one ever brings this up. I think Brian Kemp is a sleeper candidate. Okay. I think he won for the GOP, obviously. I think he would be far more formidable in a general election than Ron DeSantis personally. Of course, I'm not a Republican, but he literally beat Trump at his own game in Georgia. He's never said an ill thing about Trump too. He hasn't like burned a bridge with Trump. He just sort of like won Georgia. He defeated Trump's weak candidates. He won when Trump's candidate Herschel Walker couldn't unseat Warnock. He's very popular there. I just think he's got a lot to sell. The people in Georgia think it's a good economy. He's done a good job. They appreciate his handling of COVID. And he's like the only guy I think that can legitimately say, I won without Trump. In fact, I won when Trump was trying to do me in and he couldn't do me in. And I'm not saying anything bad about Trump. I'm just saying I did it. And I think he will have, in a general election, he would have a ton of appeal to swing voters. So I just wonder what you think about whether or not he can emerge as a candidate in a GOP field.
I do. I don't think he's going to run this time. But I take your analysis point. He is, and the thing is people sort of talk about him in his state. He does not have the national name ID that DeSantis does. They talk about him in his state the same way they talk about DeSantis. Like the things they love about him, he's great on COVID. He passed that voting bill and that was one of the ways he got around Trump is he passed this voter integrity bill that made them feel like he made it right. And he's dealt with Trump just by ignoring Trump. The thing is He can't do that if Trump's in the race. I'm just not sure. I'm not sure how like Ron DeSantis has national ambitions. It's Ron DeSantis's moment. He can't afford to sit this one out. Kemp can. And I'm not, he might get in. I'm not saying he definitely won't, but like, I agree with you as a sleeper candidate if he runs. I'm not sure that he'll get in.
Is that
Sarah,
it? Do I get to ask more questions?
You got a really, really fast one. I mean, I don't know. Sarah might have an appointment she needs to get to, but
oh no, Sarah's got nothing better to do than to talk to us. I'm sure of it. Okay, so one last thing. As you look, okay, you can choose. I have 2 questions, and you can choose which one to answer. It's Biden's about to give the State of the Union. What do you think Biden needs to do? Not just in terms of the State of the Union, but what do you think he needs to do for the Democratic Party? Or what metric do you have your eye on that other people, you rarely hear other people talk about, but because you do the focus groups, like there's a certain metric that you kind of just know this is important for me to keep my eye on, and I always keep my eye on that thing.
Just keep in mind that if you answer the SOTU question, that when people listen to this, it will have already taken place.
Okay, well then I just have a stronger opinion on that, because I would answer the focus group question by saying the thing I've been looking for lately has been around the always Trump and trying to understand that size. On the State of the Union, though, do you know what? It is so much less important what Biden says and so much more important how he looks. And so the big thing in the focus groups that comes up, people are, and this is not shouldn't shock anybody, but people are worried about his age. Democrats, swing voters, they think he's too old to run. And he doesn't get that many shots to sort of show people a real spry version of himself. And I think tonight, less what he says, but if he comes out and because sometimes he gives those performances where you're like, you're clenched the whole time, being like, get through it, man. Don't slip up. Don't say Iran when you meet Iraq or whichever one, just, nail it. And if he has one of those things where he looks really good, he looks really sharp, he sounds sharp, that's going to matter more than like the specific things he talks about.
Sarah Longwell is the publisher of The Bulwark. Her podcast, the
Focus Group.
The Focus Group. It's amazing, guys. It is such a fun podcast. I'm not even kidding. And is there anything else, Sarah, you wanna pitch that you're doing? Anything cool?
Do check out the Focus Group podcast. We listen to focus groups. If you ever want to know why do Trump voters think the things that they think, we're going to let you hear directly from them. For a long time, I didn't really like being, I didn't want you to take my word for it. And so now we bring them directly to you. Check it out.
So cool. Sarah, this is one of my favorite episodes in a long time. This was so much fun. And Carrie, does it have to be once a year? Like let's
I don't know. It depends.
Gary, why don't you talk to me more often? Have me on the show.
Well, once a year. Like, can we make it quarterly? I mean, this is so much fun.
Yeah, no, we can definitely have Sarah back more often as long as she can make time for us. That's all I got to say. So we appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so very, very much. It's interesting. We have this theory about Ron DeSantis, and maybe we are trapped in that, like, nobody's going to vote for Trump because he's so terrible and abhorrent. And maybe that's what we think about Ron DeSantis. But really, he's such a small person when you see him on the stage. And maybe a clip, anybody can take any clip and edit it to make him look like kick-ass and like the fighter. But that overall presence that Ron DeSantis brings into a room is always very underwhelming, in my opinion. But again, I'm not a Republican, and so it's hard to get into that mindset and think like them. But I still, my operating theory is still that he's going to be like one of those long list of Republicans who everybody thinks are going to be such a power in a primary and then fizzle out for whatever reason, like Jeb Bush, like Fred Thompson, like Scott Walker of Wisconsin. I mean, these were all people everybody assumed were front runners, if not the front runner, only to flame out.
I think, I have to say, after talking to Sarah, and I mean, I think this came out in the poll they did too, that regardless of who, I mean, in some ways, it doesn't matter much who wins the nomination if it's not Trump. It matters more that it's simply not Trump, because he is going to do everything he can to tear down that candidate. And it doesn't matter whether that candidate is Ron DeSantis or, Brian Kemp. I mean, it sounds like Sarah doesn't think he's running, but it just doesn't matter who, Glenn Youngkin, I mean, Nikki Haley, whatever. It doesn't matter. Trump is going to be seething mad, and he's either going to run, launch a scrappy third party run, or he's going to do everything possible to tear that candidate down. So there's a piece of me that really feels like in some ways it almost doesn't matter. There's no way that anyone, I think, can tie up, even Ron DeSantis, all of Trump's votes, to Sarah's point. It's not going to be 28% that walk away, but it's just impossible for me to believe that anyone's going to be able to bring along all of those people that Trump brought into the party. So
yeah, no, it's definitely challenging. It's a lose-lose situation. And yeah, they got the presidency in 2016, but I mean, we already have, they've lost 18, 20, 22, 3 elections in a row that they've lost directly because of Donald Trump. And I wouldn't mind if that streak continued at least one more.
Absolutely.
Cycle.
I mean, they made it. Look, the Republican Party made a deal with the devil, and they've been paying for it ever since. And God bless them. I hope they continue to pay for it for a long time.
So that is our show for today. Carrie, that was awesome. I'm not kidding. Like, we got to have Sarah on more often than annually. She's so
good.
Here.
She's thoughtful, and I appreciate her a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks to everybody. Thank you, Carrie, for being my awesome co-host. Thanks to Walter for producing. Thanks to everybody that helps behind the scenes. Dorothy, Paul, and am I missing somebody? Kara. And thank you, the viewer, listener, and Daily Kos reader, for being part of this movement, fighting for our democracy. This battle ain't ending anytime soon. The other side doesn't rest. We can't rest either. So thank you for being part of that. Love and appreciate everything you do. Catch you all next week.